Welcome to the most controversial car of 2024. It's the new BMW M5. Why is it so controversial? Well, there's a few reasons, but the main one is that apparently it is very, very heavy. But you know what? I don't believe that. I think this is one of the lightest M cars ever, as you can see from how easy it is to push. Did I mention that it's also a hybrid now? Too?
Yep, in the last 8 years, the ultimate in super saloons has gone from a straight rear-wheel drive V8 to an all-wheel drive plug-in hybrid. They say progress is king, but I'm starting to understand just why this car is so controversial.
But it's not like BMW's M division hasn't pleasantly surprised us before, because remember when the current M3 came along with its controversial styling, and then there was all-wheel drive. Weren't too sure about that, were we? But it turned out to be absolutely brilliant. And also, the thing about this car's weight, I mean, yes, 2.4 tons is a lot, it's too much, but let's not pretend that the previous M5 was a featherweight saloon. I mean, it was getting on for 2 tons. This is just a continuation of that.
And it's not like BMW has skimped on the power either. There's still a 4.4 litre twin turbocharged V8 that makes 577 brake horsepower, which actually is about 40 brake horsepower less than the F90, but this time there's a single electric motor integrated into the 8-speed transmission that adds another 194 brake horsepower.
As a result, total system output is 717 brake horsepower and 738 pounds-foot of torque. They are unbelievable numbers. It's the most powerful M5 ever made. But actually, the power-to-weight ratio is slightly worse than the previous M5, and that means that the 0 to 62 miles an hour time is also a little bit slower.
Although, let's face it, the difference between 3.4 and 3.5 seconds isn't really noticeable. And the M5 didn't need to be any quicker off the line. What it does need to do, though, is somehow turn that huge weight into an exciting drive. It's a big task.
Has it succeeded? Yeah, I think it has. Yeah, it's a little bit slower from 0 to 62 miles an hour, but the rolling speed, the speed in gear or when you're overtaking, that is noticeably better. And because you've got that electric motor in the transmission, it means that when you want the power, it's there. You flex your foot on the accelerator and you get that instant surge of forward motion. And if you want to see it in action, you just pull the left-hand paddle. That activates boost mode and everything goes into maximum attack. So when you go for the accelerator, I mean, this thing is so fast. And you know what? I like the noise this thing makes. I mean, it's obviously not up there with previous M5s that have not had a plug-in hybrid powertrain or maybe not had turbochargers. Of course not, but I don't think the quality of the sound is any worse than it is on the BMW M3, and yes, there's lots of sound augmentation going on, but at the end of the day, it rumbles like a V8, it revs nicely, it sounds good when you're in the upper reaches of the rev range. It's a pretty convincing effort. I've got no issues with it, I can't really complain. I know a few people aren't so keen, but for me, it sounds pretty good.
Okay, but it's no real shock that a V8 with 717 brake horsepower is fast and sounds decent. But what is surprising is what the M5 is like in the corners.
What's really impressed me about this M5 is despite how big and heavy it is and how wide it is, I felt confident in it straight away. The front end is so pointy. You've got a variable ratio steering rack, which is the first time we've ever had that in an M5. And just off center, the steering response is really direct and quick. And yeah, it does take some getting used to, but once you do get used to it, it just means that you can be really quite delicate with your inputs. I've got no doubt that the rear wheel steering, also first time in an M5, is helping with that agility. But I think most of it comes from just this really well-judged steering, and it does make the car feel agile. And when you're really leaning it into a corner and you get to the point where you are getting a bit of slip from the front wheels, and that takes a lot, you can just come off the accelerator and the car adjusts around its axis. It doesn't feel like a runaway train like you'd perhaps expect from a car that, I'll say it again, weighs this much. I mean, no doubt on a track when the speeds are higher, you'll start to feel that weight more, definitely, but there'll be more focused versions to come. But with this car on the road, I've got no problems with the way that it goes around corners.
The only time you start to feel the suspension struggle is over large expansion joints in the road. It's not so much that it unsettles the car, but the harshness coming through the chassis suggests the damping is approaching its limit. And as such, there are times when it starts to feel a touch edgy and lacking a little bit of composure. Unfortunately, that's what you get when you drive a 2.5-ton limo like a sports car.
And while there are a lot of drive mode settings in this car, there's an awful lot of customization. I like it because you can tailor-make it to whichever road or environment you're in. I think the drive logic, the transmission setting being in its most aggressive Sport Plus mode is a bit much. The changes are a bit jolty, and also the chassis in Sport Plus doesn't really work on the road. Comfort or Sport are absolutely fine. You know, if you can get over the size and the weight and potentially the looks, if that's not your thing of the new M5s, then there's a lot of car here. There's a huge amount of car, and I'm surprised with how much I like it. Especially given how comfortable and refined it is. I drove it from London to South Wales for this shoot, and it was easy. It was a lovely thing to drive down in. And then when you get here, it's still brilliant.
So the M5 is comfortable, absolutely rapid, and surprisingly good fun. The only problem with that is that when it comes to fast, capable luxury cars, Audi has been all over it for years. And right on cue, here's Mr. Ben Barry with a timely reminder of why the M5 still has some very stiff competition.
I first drove the M5 back in the summer as a prototype. I liked it straight away, but I still think it's got its work cut out to beat this, the RS6, and that's not despite it being 5 years old, that's because it's 5 years old. There's no plug-in hybrid technology here, just the merest whiff of mild hybridization, 4-litre V8, 8-speed automatic gearbox, all-wheel drive. It's just the same as the RS6 has been for the last couple of generations, and I think there are plenty of people out there who now want the last of what we've got. They don't want the next thing as we sort of creep towards full electrification. They want the last while they can still have it, and that certainly ticks the box in this case with the RS6. Now, it sounds a bit crazy to say this in the context of the RS6, but versus the M5, this is the more compact car by quite a margin. It's also hundreds of kilos lighter at 2,100 kilos, which is already pretty heavy anyway. Now, this one's the performance model. They're all performance models now, apart from the super toppy GT, the limited edition thing that's 170 grand, and that means 621 brake horsepower. And combined with that weight, 2.1 tons, that means the power to weight ratio is 296 brake horsepower per ton, and that is 1 brake horsepower more than the M5. Now, I think a key reason to buy the RS6 is because you want an all-rounder, and you know, in the name of research, I've been driving this car around for a week now. I've been doing all sorts in it, taking the family out, driving on A roads, B roads, motorways, around town, wet and dry roads, and it has absolutely aced all that stuff. It is a lovely car to live with. It is really refined, it's sophisticated, it's got this kind of luxurious feel. It's a real high performance car that doesn't involve any compromise whatsoever. 4-litre V8 is really key to this car's appeal. You know, when you're on the daily grind, it kind of just slips into the background in some of the less aggressive engine modes. This is in the more pronounced engine mode, so you may be able to hear it burbling away, but it just slips away, really sophisticated, really muscular and flexible. But then when you crank it up, it really delivers. Now there is some lag here, but once you get to about 2,300, that's when it all really wakes up and starts to deliver. But it's really linear, really powerful. It's almost like a GIF in the way it keeps repeating its performance on a kind of endless loop. Just really linear, just keeps pulling. When you do wind it up, I love the sound of this thing. It's just really kind of deep and bassy and resonant, and it reminds me of those slightly niche reference, but those drums you get in orchestra pits where they're like half an eggshell shape and they're playing them with drumsticks that have got those big felt ends on them to damp down the sound, and it's got that kind of lovely kind of really kind of characterful. I love it. Now this is the performance carbon Vorsprung, so you get the base performance version, you get carbon black, and you get carbon Vorsprung. And you might remember me and James did a video earlier this year on the M3 Touring and the RS6. I was a little bit down on the RS6 in that video, and I really like this car, and it's almost exactly the same spec. So I'm not fully rowing back on that because that other car was a carbon Vorsprung, and with that spec you get the 22-inch alloy wheels that are 20 kilos lighter all round, but you're also supposed to get Continental Sport Contact 7s. That car didn't come on the Contis, it came on Hankook tyres. I just couldn't get the confidence in the front end, I couldn't get the bite, and that really spoiled it for me. This car, it's on the Contis and it's completely transformed. Partly it's transformed because you've got that extra front end bite, but it's also, I think it feels sharper. I don't know if that's sidewall stiffness or quite what it is, but actually the first time I got into it, it felt kind of over responsive. When I turned into a corner, it felt like it was turning in too much. And what you do get with these cars now, all the performance models, is dynamic steering, so variable ratio steering, and rear wheel steering as well. So those two things combine makes it super agile and responsive, but it is perhaps a little bit over responsive. I feel like I'm making multiple inputs to actually place the car where I want it to go. Now the steering on this car is really nice, I think, with a caveat which I'll get onto in a minute, but in terms of daily usability with this steering, it's got a real nice weighting to it. Obviously you can tweak that, but ultimately in the middle setting it's got a nice resistance and feedback. I think versus the M5's really kind of chunky steering wheel, it's nice to have such a thin diameter wheel. You've got the Alcantara on the rim as well, which makes it feel tactile. I think even before you're really doing much with it, it helps make this car feel lighter and more agile. When I was back home and driving this car on greasier roads, I was getting a little bit of push and understeer on some of the faster stuff. And that was with the sport locking diff is standard on these cars now, and you can set it to comfort, balanced, or more dynamic. And in the more dynamic setting, it really wakes this car up, really digs in and makes it much more positive in the way it powers out of a corner. I think as a complete package, this thing really takes some beating. What I really like about it is it's so usable every day. It's the sort of thing that you could use it in the same way as you could a Range Rover. You could toss the keys to someone else in your household who maybe doesn't want to be scared by an edgy feeling performance car, and it just does its thing. And yet when you step up and you do use that performance, it can really deliver. I think as an all-round package, it's still 5 years on, really does take some beating, this car.
So unsurprisingly, the RS6 is still deeply impressive. And if you thought its cabin was dominated by screens, then, well, the M5 takes it a step further. With its super wide curved screen and a light show that would put the Las Vegas Strip to shame, it's undoubtedly the more up-to-date and tech-filled cabin. Having said that, it does have a number of shortcut buttons on the M panel, and there's also a handy dial to control the menus without having to operate the touchscreen. This means that although both cars have personalised drive mode shortcut buttons, the M5 is the slightly easier car to make quick adjustments on. As for the driving position, the RS6 feels lower and more natural. plus its slimmer Alcantara trimmed steering wheel is much nicer to hold than the overly chunky rim on the M5. For those after a more old school design, the RS6 clings on a little harder to the cabin design of the 2010s, whereas the M5 is, for better or worse, absolutely with the times. Either way, both cars make for a lovely place to sit in. But which one is our overall favourite? Before making our final decision, I hopped into the M5 with Ben to get a read on his thoughts and glean some bonus information about the development process of the M5.
It's just got so much, hasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
we're barely scraping the surface there, going up to what, 5,000 RPM or something? It's got a load more to go, and it's, I don't know, it felt pretty rapid to me.
Yeah, it's just so effortlessly quick with that rolling speed when you want it. I mean, the things that I noticed after driving it for only about half an hour was that BMW's M division has done a lot better with the transition from regular, straightforward petrol to plug-in hybrid than AMG has done with the C63. I know they're not strictly rivals, but it's night and day different because that powertrain really let the car down.
It's very nicely integrated, isn't it? From the step from being in electric mode in the hybrid setting and then transition into petrol. I think the mechanical transition is very good, it's very smooth, but you've also got this synthetic noise that maybe some people might not like the idea of. But it kind of smooths over that in an experiential way as well. As you're sitting there driving it, it feels very consistent.
And actually, because BMW has added the hybrid element to the powertrain, there's now even more modes that you can choose. I mean, before you've got things like the steering, the brake, the drive logic, which is the gearbox, the suspension, all of the obvious stuff, but now you can go into M hybrid and you've got dynamic plus, electric, e-control hybrid. Is it too much, do you think?
It is too much. I mean, the get out of jail card for that is that you've still got these M1 and M2 buttons on the steering wheel, and effectively you can set one for your everyday and one for kind of high performance driving. So I get that, but initially as you approach it, there's an awful lot of stuff to get through, and there's so many different variables that sometimes just having them in two settings it might not be enough anyway.
Do you think with this M5 that there's a danger that maybe it's easy to judge it too harshly? Because the last M5 that we remember, and that a lot of the people watching this video will remember, was the F90, the M5 CS, which was one of the best M5s of all time, whereas this is the entry level, it's the first M5 of the new gen, and it's obviously not going to match up to that from a dynamic point of view.
I think there is that risk, and also I'm not sure that they're going to do a competition version.
Oh, really?
I was really lucky earlier this summer, actually, just before Goodwood, to drive this in prototype form. It was actually finished and signed off in terms of a chassis point of view, but I spent a day driving it with Dirk Hacker, who is second in charge at M Division. So it was quite interesting to get his insights on that. Just seem, sometimes they play their cards close to their chest, don't they? But I just wasn't sure they were going to do one. They'll certainly do something like a CS again, I think. But I mean, it's a very different car, isn't it, to the CS? It's the plug-in hybrid. It's a bigger car. It's a heavier car. It's quite a different proposition.
And how does it compare to the prototype that you drove? Is this the same?
It feels as I remember it. So the chassis was signed off. I'm not sure. It was still in camouflage, I think, maybe from a more of a visual point of view. Drove it back to back with the M5 Touring. But it was interesting to hear the logic on why they went for the plug-in hybrid, and I sort of empathised with their situation at the time. So this was back 5 years ago. They were having their regular meetings that they have on a Tuesday morning, him with Frank Van Meel and the senior team. And they were looking at, could we do a V8 in 5 years' time for a car that's going to be on sale for 7 years? Well, they thought, quite understandably, maybe they couldn't, but maybe full electric was just a step too far to go from an M5 with no hybridization at all to straight to that. So they had all sorts of different discussions about that, and it started off with the M3's engine, the S58, the six-cylinder, maybe a smaller electric battery. And then they just decided they wanted to do everything. They wanted to keep the V8, the 4.4 litre V8, and they wanted some proper electric range. So they've kind of refused to compromise and done everything, but the compromise is then having a car that is very heavy. 2.4 tons or just over.
Interesting.
Oh, that was quite rough, wasn't it? So that's in drive logic setting 3, the maximum gear shift speed, and that is a little bit uncouth. I think it's too much. It's trying too hard.
Yeah, I'd agree. But I think what's so nice about this is that you can switch between four-wheel drive sport, two-wheel drive, and you've almost got 2.5 cars in one with that. Yeah, this four-wheel drive sport mode we're in now, if we just accelerate. Yeah. Oh, that rear bias there was absolutely, and then just hooking up out this corner, all that power. And you won't get, I mean, the RS6, it can push more power to the rear, but you won't get that same level of easy to access, little bit of rotation.
What M has done really well is kept that spirit of rear wheel drive. You could feel it was not fully Larry there, but it was very, very rear biased. It felt maybe 95% rear biased, and just a little bit at the front. So I think that balance that they've dialed into this car, that is key to its appeal, and that's when, versus the RS6, when you really start to push it, that's when it just has to make the difference for me.
Yeah, definitely.
Coming into this test, the RS6 was a known quantity for both of us. And yet, as it approaches the twilight of its production, this particular RS6 felt better than any other example I'd driven before. Compared with the M5, it felt smaller, lighter, often more pliant, and that engine is just a masterpiece. The RS6 has a huge reputation, and it's not going quietly. For many, this would be the pick of the two cars, and justifiably so. However, Ben and I both agree that the M5's ability to take its outright performance to a level slightly higher, but also more versatile than the RS6's, gives it the win. The way it can switch from comfortable cruiser to a ballistic and hugely enjoyable B-road weapon is simply sublime. The size and weight are both excessive, but they don't spoil the experience thanks to some utterly outstanding engineering and a clear determination to bring the feeling of an M car into the plug-in hybrid generation. It's a close one, but the M5 is simply too good to turn down.